I thought I'd dress appropriately for something.
Wow! I hope you're all good with humor around this subject. We need to kind of keep it light. You all are in good health.
You have no idea what the humor about.
Oh, they can fly around? All right. Oh, yeah, that's okay. Good. As they're working on their handouts, again, I'm Pastor Karen Natterstad. I'm your interim lead pastor. At some point in the introductions that the three pastors did, Sue Swing picked up on. I enjoy doing teaching events that are more workshop or pretty kind of application focused. And I had brought up this idea and had done a couple presentations on planning your funeral, only because I witnessed in 30 years of parish ministry just some kind of hiccups of church members being disappointed and how their fellow choir member, how the children made decisions around that, and yet you're empathetic because the loved one never left those kids any instruction, and so they're kind of making this up as they go. I'm recognizing funerals are a gathering of strangers often. Someone knows from work, from past friendships, from other communities, from other churches, and they're coming together for some experience. And I think I'm seeing in the culture a little shift in attitudes about faith, what happens, people's attitudes about what happens to us when we die, and how they want to mark that occasion, if you will. And so I'm going to kind of touch on some of that. Hopefully we swing back and it becomes a very practical 10 things that you might want to consider making decisions around. But I will kind of wander into my little curiosity about some cultural shifts going on and that are causing us to navigate, as well as maybe just to touch a little bit on our theology, but that might have to wait for another conversation. So in we go. All right. Here's kind of where I started with. Important decisions. What? And I'll come back to that. One of the big ones you'll want to consider is burial, full body in a casket in the ground or in a mausoleum, or a cremation, which will lead to a memorial service. That's probably one of your important decisions. Where is another one. There are lots of choices at church. It's going to be St. Matthew's. It's going to be at the funeral home. It's going to be some other place that you're going to have your celebration of life. When, sorry, I didn't mean when you die. You're not planning that. But when should that funeral take place? Lots of you have personal experience with this too, that it's immediately after death or it's months, even years. And boy, COVID sure threw a curveball in that decision making as well. And I want to also keep in the back of your mind, there's some stewardship decisions here to make about how do you want to, what do you want to pay for? And how much do you want to spend? I just invite you to kind of wrestle with that, all right? So we'll be coming back to that. I've kind of pitched this as what makes a good funeral. And here's some of my thoughts. That somehow in this experience that we are honoring the deceased's life and their body. This is the one that's kind of stewing in my mind a little bit, and I will confess, after I did my first workshop, you know how the books start showing up. This is Thomas Long accompanying them with singing The Christian Funeral, a much deeper kind of survey in this, and he spends quite a bit more time in this whole conversation around honoring the body that has died. How are we doing that? But there might be something to keep in mind in that. But also that there is care for not only the deceased, but also the living, right? The loved ones, those who know you, right? So we're trying to be mindful of that. We're expressing or reaffirming what we Christians believe about death and about eternal life. I think there is in this funeral memorial service room, how can we make room for both the sorrow and for the joy? That both emotions are appropriate in this context. And as I said, to be good stewards of your resources. Okay? Here's the point. We start with necessity, right? A body has passed away. We have to do something with it. Tom Long will go into every culture, every generation, every religion has had its own way of dealing with the necessity of a body. You know, he said, this is him saying, a dead body must be moved fairly quickly from right here to somewhere over there. And in this regards, Christians are no different. And Christians' practices have varied, but all Christian funerals will bear witness to the gospel. That is a story that tells us that here is life. We share the faith, and there is a place in the arms of God toward which we are moving. You like kind of just to let you think about that. Here is this life. And our theology says this life is good, that this earth is good. Remember, Jesus came to be in this earth, right? And God's mission was out of love for the world. And the end is to come and finally heal this world. So there's something we value and appreciate about this life. And then we talk about this eternal life, or in the arms of God, that is somehow this mystery of what that is. And again, I think that would be a whole nother class to talk about. What do we believe happens after we die? Okay. Here's some of the verses we turn to that proclaim that promise of being in the arms of God, a Father's house, being with Christ, dying and rising with Christ, right? These are some, and you'll see those in your handout of readings. When I ask about making plans to help those who follow you, this is probably the three areas of responsible parties that will fulfill your wishes. Certainly your loved ones. You need to identify who that is. If it's your children, if you don't have children, then who would it be? Is it a trust? Is it another relative? Or is it a friend? And as you know, all of these planning things, you kind of have to reevaluate, revisit them again as life changes, right? Your spouse may be your first person. If there isn't a spouse, then who? These are really, really personal questions, aren't they? But you're trying to leave some plans for them. A funeral home. This is, again, legally, the funeral home in our country has the legal responsibility and authority to move bodies. So you need to employ the use of some funeral home or a crematorium or something, okay? I do not endorse one over the other. This is for you to kind of share your, I got a good plumber stories of who you think that you would recommend. And the third party, of course, I'm assuming would be your church. That there's going to be some official at, officiating at your funeral memorial service. And I'm seeing some real kind of creativity going on. It isn't always the priest or the pastor being invited to do that work. So that will be kind of a location or the staff that are assisting you in that. When I say loosely made plans, this is also to be really mindful. These are not loosely made plans. These are very specific, difficult to honor plans. And if you write this down and tell your children or tell your loved ones, this is what that I wanted, 7 o'clock on a Wednesday. Of course I want Pastor Gary to come back and do my funeral. And of course I want John and the choir or Dave Moore to sing the solo. I want balloons released. I actually had this one on a request, no relish tray at the luncheon. I just thought this 90-year-old had a lot of time to think about this. He thought a relish tray was a waste of time. Or you want your flowers laid on the gravestone every Mother's Day. Yeah, this is not loosely laid. This is kind of binding requests that are very difficult to follow through. So you need to kind of juggle where you're at with that. So I said the first one is a decision around cremation or burial. So I gave you the ELCA's position on cremation and organ donation. You're welcome to take that home and read on it. The bottom line is we have no strong opinion, pro or con. Okay? According to statistics from the National Funeral Directors Association, it would just guess today in 2020 how many deaths are cremated today in the United States.
I think it's a majority
50%.
now. I think it's.
Yeah, it's 50-50. It's about 50-50, and they're projecting in 20 years it might be about 80%.
Are green burials becoming more common?
Well, funny you should ask that, Brian. So look at my pictures. So see, this is the thing. There's so many more choices. This is what baby boomers are doing to the funeral traditions. And it is, it's a gift, but it can also be a challenge to say, I have the freedom to choose, but it's like going down the soda pop aisle. There's so many more choices. It's like, maybe that I don't choose that at all. Okay, so Brian mentions, you know this is more the familiar, right? What is this called? Cemetery, and what do you do with the casket? You burial, right? Burial with a tombstone marker, okay? Then there's, I think this is, can you see this picture? You could do a casket and put it where? In a vault or a mausoleum, is that what that structure's called?
Yeah.
Or is that? And you can also do cremains in an urn and also put them in a cupboard, a drawer, or a shelf. Or I didn't know this is a new one. You can do just a shelf, kind of display with other memorabilia. And then Brian asked about I'm just hearing about this year actually, more of a natural burial. So here is a casket maker. They're woven baskets, or they're like shrouds that you would be wrapped in that. And then there's two of them, natural burials. Forest Home Cemetery has a natural burial area where you are simply laid in the ground and it becomes a prairie, and there might be just one marker, kind of memorial marker that your names are going there. Or they also have a scattering field, and it is exactly what it sounds like, that your loved ones would just scatter them on this prairie grass, and then your name could also be added here. Am I not kidding? There's lots of choices for us. Yeah.
That doesn't sound good.
Okay, so your wheels are turning. That's good. You're going to make a decision: burial or cremation. Now, and you know that these also have not just personal, what do I like, but there's always these practical things about, you live in Florida 4 months of the year, and your family's all up here in Wisconsin, so transportation is an issue. How do you transport a body? Or in my case, my parents are all in western Minnesota, and so, these are just considerations, right? They're doable, but not, okay? Who knows the rules about scattering ashes? Anne?
They're different everywhere.
They're different everywhere. I had kind of under the impression there's a real no-no on it, but the more I was reading, it's kind of like, no, we're okay, but you should probably ask permission. And people do it anyway, so, and then become real personal things of, you know, so you move from that property, you sell the lake home, I don't know, right? These are all kinds of things to consider. So this is your personal decision, and then it's the other side of just what are we asking of the living. So here is, and how to honor the body. Here is probably what we're all familiar with, the very traditional. When I started in ministry, funerals were often at 10 o'clock in the morning during the week, and you would have the service, and then the casket would go into the hearse, and we would parade, we would do the procession, right? Put all the flags on the cars, and we would all drive out to the cemetery, and a few people, along with the luncheon ladies, would stay back and get the lunch ready, and then we would come back after going to the cemetery and have our luncheon. And it was an all-day affair. And there was definitely this, you know, pallbearers and following the casket and that real honoring of it. What we see now is, this probably happened quite a bit during COVID, that the gathering is by the graveside, a small gathering. Here in this case is with an urn, but it could be with the body, and there's a short service, and it's all kind of right there. Then, here's the take my ashes to the Brewers game kind of idea. That's what I want you to do, and scatter them. Or just hold on to them and put them on the mantle. Or, as I heard, Pastor Chris kept his parents in the office I'm in right now on the shelf. So maybe you didn't know that. And then this is what I call the celebration at the hall. That we all just come, have some drinks, raise a toast, and it's kind of an open mic, kind of cheer on our loved one. And the urn probably is not present. I've not been invited to that yet.
You're not Irish.
So tell me the Irish tradition. Who said that?
Well, the Irish wake.
Yeah.
When my grandfather died, my aunt, who was a nun, participated as well. There's a lot of imbibing and storytelling and celebration. So he wasn't propped up in the corner or anything, but it was considered, you know, you're sending him along.
Yeah.
But you did the traditional funeral too.
We did a traditional funeral and we did the wake.
Right.
And the wake is before or after the funeral?
It's usually before. But I mean, there's a gathering after too. If I can go on, there's another Celtic tradition in Loch Lomond, the song, "You take the high road and I'll take the low road, but I'll be in Scotland before you." That is signifying, it signifies that the soldier who goes on, he was released from the prison, takes the high road back to Scotland. The one who dies in prison takes the low road. He gets to Scotland first because his soul travels underground to his homeland. That's what Loch Lomond is all about.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
The beauty of living a bit longer is we see all these celebrations, and we should take the opportunity, and I'm thinking of all of us, to take the good that we see in a funeral and transpose it so that our loved ones don't have to make all these decisions in grief. That's for sure.
Absolutely. That's the whole point of gathering today.
I remember, I will share this, I remember Dick funeral where he had a jazz, it was a jazz band come in and do a slow march out after the funeral, and we did have a sharing during the funeral of some of the things that Dick had done, and it was a good, that was a good sharing. So we see these things and we should take that up and not be afraid to transpose our personal signatures on our own funerals, for sure.
And thank you for saying that. So as your pastor at this point, I have no clear direction for you other than to encourage you to make some choices and talk about this event that reflects your faith. And I do think it's a bit of a privilege to choose some things that make it personal, right? This is the difference between what I'll hear people say, a disappointing funeral is, it wasn't personal, you know, it was just boom, boom, boom. We went through the liturgy and it could have been anybody. So we're hurt by that. And what is also is, I think, when there's that message of hope and faith is missing, we're hurt, we're bothered by that, or a real respect for the loved one, or some honesty about that loved one, that they weren't perfect. We're really good with that. And so these feel like the kind of overarching things that I would encourage, but you know, how you're gonna get there. I'll give you some good structure, and then it's kind of, you know, what you add after that could be interesting. I know Don wants to jump in.
Yeah, there's one thing that you can do with the funeral home. It's like a insurance policy. I did it with my mother, my dad's sister, my aunt, who was never married. She did it for herself. She went in years before at the funeral parlor on North Avenue, and she got an insurance policy which paid for everything, because in the years ensuing with inflation, that may get higher and higher. That is set right there for you, and I did that for my mom.
Yeah, I was going to get to that too, Don. I appreciate that, and I did that with my parents, especially my dad. As his dementia was progressing, we were looking at a nursing home situation, and you're like, okay, let's make sure the money lasts for my mother. And so, in our situation, it's called a trust fund. Maybe some of you familiar with that? Okay, and it's money set aside that won't ever be taken. Some people prepay, is that still a thing?
That's what you do, yeah.
And then you're kind of locking in on today's prices, right? Or you can simply just meet your funeral home and go and do some pre-planning, even if it's not financial. You can kind of lock in, because the idea is the moment you've passed, you know, or very soon, the next step, besides the doctor saying yes, you've deceased, is your family needs to contact a funeral home. And if they already know, oh yeah, we call so and so. I mean, that for me feels like a really helpful decision. Okay, jump in.
I just wanted to add one more option: burial, cremation, or donation. I've been looking at that, and I've signed on with Wisconsin
Medical College
Memorial Hospital, and found out that when I did this years ago, there really was no cost. Now there is, but anyhow, my name is on the list. If they determine that I am useful as a donated body and they accept me, my estate pays at this point $450. That covers the cost of the body being transported from wherever it is to their facility. It covers cremation after they are done with me. And it covers taking the body, the ashes, cremains, back to the family or wherever it's designated. So, and organ donation, of course, is also so needed. So if somebody is close to dying and you want to consider that, that's something else that probably should be on the list.
Yeah.
Trudy, if you're not cremated, do they now tell the family where you're buried? Because my friend, to the day he died, did not know where his wife was buried. She donated herself to the university for study, and they buried her, but they would not tell him where she was.
Oh, they did not say anything about taking care of the remains. It was returning them to the family.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's a body rather than cremains.
That I can see. Okay.
I thought cremation was the only option at that point.
Yeah, this was 1975.
Yeah. This is as of last week.
Okay.
Just in talking about that, I know there's a spot at the Wauwatosa Cemetery where they have a headstone, and it says right on it, for all the people that donated, you know, their remains are here or something like that.
Okay.
They're in a mass
It's a mass,
grave.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Carl?
We many times think of organ donation. I have a son-in-law who teaches physiology and anatomy in California. And they have a powerful ritual with the medical students who are doing the dissecting of bodies that have been donated. And they have Brian has been so impressed with the kind of holiness of the whole thing.
At the end of the semester.
You know, that's something that is part of learning as they dissect the body, you know, something to think about.
One of Tom Long's concerns is when you're doing a full burial, it's very obvious you're accompanying a body, that you're you know, they're retrieving it, taking it to the funeral home brings it in a hearse to the church or to the visitation area. That they are responsible to accompany that body, but we as the community also will do some very intentional things that we process in. We use the funeral pall. We have pallbearers. We go into the worship service and we follow out to the worship service, and we, you know, and I watched some of this stuff got flipped around, and as in, we'll do the luncheon now and then we'll go do the burial. And it's convenient, but you start to kind of lose this care for the body. And this becomes for me more of a conversation for the faith community than maybe for your personal decision making, because you're not going to have much say in what your pastor or your church is practicing at that time. But I do have some concerns then when and I'm so guilty of it as I think about this, the memorial service, the urn kind of, you know, like, oh, where do we put it? We don't have any place in the altar. No, we don't put it on the altar. Let's pull out a little flower stand and put it here. And then everybody leaves and the funeral director like goes, oh, you forgot your ashes. And they take them and they put them in the trunk, and then you take them home and put them in the closet. And I'm kind of being goofy here, but I'm being mindful of, can we show the same respect for the body, even though it's cremated, that we would for burial, saying this is still the person, this is still their flesh. You know, I'm just kind of wrestling with that as a faith community, that maybe there's some better ways we can do that. Jump in, Ann.
For Harvin Abrahamson's funeral, one of his relatives was like the person who was charged with keeping track of the urn the whole day of the funeral. It was like his job to kind of guard it, right?
Yeah.
And his son, we processed in for the opening hymn,
Right.
and his son carried the urn, and he was the first in the procession
Right.
to come in, and it was very reverent and really lovely.
I like that. What else?
There's a school of thought that the soul sticks around for several days after. And if that school of thought was in fact true, I mean, I would think our relatives and friends would like to have a respect for us viewing them and mourning our passing.
Right. Darla?
My husband died. We had the funeral at Jesu, and we had the procession in and the procession out. His grandson carried the urn out.
As an urn, with an urn?
It was an urn. Actually, it was a box. And at that point, the funeral director took over. And Mike took care, John took care of everything at that point, including getting it to the reception. So he was at his reception, and then to my place, and then we buried about a month later. And the funeral director came and picked up the box and took it to the cemetery for burial. So it was always, you know, in control.
Good. That's nice. Jan?
Does St. Matthew's have a cremains pall?
Not that I'm aware. Does anybody know what that is? What is a pall? Is it so?
Yes, we do.
It's a cover.
We have a cremains pall?
Not for their thing.
So there's a funeral pall, which is
You're
this.
talking about the cremains? I've seen them, a little pall put over
Yeah, Pastor Chris called it an angel clock
Oh.
when we were
Yeah.
meeting with some.
Maybe the funeral home brought it, I don't know.
If you don't, I think that would be a great memorial gift for someone to make.
It's a baptismal robe, you know.
Right, so like the funeral pall, which is that big piece of white fabric, it's very ornate, it looks like your pyramids. It is placed over the casket as a symbol of the baptismal gown. And carried and reverently. And so Jan is reminding us that now that the newer is there are those sort of white drape that can go over an urn with that, to show that same symbolism that this is a baptized child of God.
Well, and also, I mean, you can get them to match the casket pall.
Yes, you can,
Yeah.
you know, like pyramids, they can be a whole match set.
And a
I mean,
pastor told
idea,
me
sure.
that another thing that's somewhat easier to explain to families, and I was a person before I moved here, I, for years, took care of the funerals. And the pall, on top of being the reminder of your baptism, it makes everyone equal in the church. Which I think is a statement for the, it's equal, and that was somewhat difficult for certain families. Oh, we bought this beautiful walnut casket. Well, yes, but in the church you are equal.
We're covered, everybody wears the pall. Yeah. And because in our theology of the funeral is that we're accompanying the deceased, the saint, the child of God, into the arms of God, that this promise at baptism, right, when you were marked with the cross of Christ forever, is now we're finally completing that final promise. And so we're getting you really close, but we as the community want to accompany you this whole way. Okay, that's our theology. That's the reverence to the remains, and I think it says something about us, our culture, and who we are, and the respect we show to the dead. Let me go off on one of my tirades too. Over the years, and this I don't know the funeral homes here in your community, but I am in the sense that they are a business. And they are dealing now with burials of Christians, non-Christians, and lots of other religions, and rightly so. They need to honor all of that. But the piece I'm struggling, it's turning a little bit into, there's products. As you can say, you choose the casket. Well, now over in the world of remains, I'll just be snotty about this. How upset I was after the suicide of a young man. The 3 children show up for the burial. I mean, this is just days afterward. He's been cremated, and they're carrying teddy bears with remains of their father in it. I was really upset by that. I found that really inappropriate because I thought it was kind of preying on their grief, making a purchase, and what do you do with a teddy bear with remains in it for the rest of their life? I was struggling with that. I mean, maybe that's really a great sentiment, and there'll be lockets and jewelry and all this, and just theologically dividing up the body into all of these parts, personally is disturbing. I mean, if you choose that and that's really meaningful to you, I don't know. But for me, it's the remains should stay together. Actually, Roman Catholics are very strong about that practice, that you don't split up the remains. Throw a little here, throw a little there, and leave a little on the altar. Okay, lots of thoughts.
Maybe we'll have to go back to the old lock of hair and
Yes, right. Yeah, that's what we used to do. You cut some hair off from your loved one.
That was Abraham.
Yes, many years ago I always questioned this thought of cremation, but was at a funeral, and the priest said, we trade an imperfect body for the future of a perfect body, so, well, then we can get rid of the old one, that's okay. It's putting it kind of blunt, but
yeah.
It's sort of, kind of got that where it maybe should be.
Yeah, it is okay, and I probably will be cremated too, so I think, I find something good stewardship-y about it. I don't know, I'm hoping I'm too young to have to really make that decision yet, but, other thoughts?
The place for children, I've been spending a lot of time over the years in the hospital settings and around a lot of death. And we have a tendency to keep the body away from children. And I've had some experiences where children are absolutely confused when they're put off in a closet after a dramatic death, a loss of a brother in an accident. And I had an experience one time where this little boy was so unsettled and they kept him away from his brother. And they kept telling him his brother was no longer here and he wouldn't believe it. And so I brought him to the funeral home and we lifted it, the body was mangled. We just lifted up the portion of the casket where he had his shoes on. And he just absolutely, that touched him and was satisfied. And I think we all know that touch of death. So I mean, I think the body has to do with coming to terms with death.
Yes.
There's a holiness
Yes.
to care for the dead body.
And
we know it's dead, you know.
And that's some great argument for full burial or open casket is that we.
Or before cremation.
Correct, that's another arrangement, right? But there's some real confrontation with death. Like that, one of my interims did a funeral, a 12-year-old boy just kind of had some heart issues no one knew about. He just dies in his sleep, right? So, no, he's in 9th grade. He just started 9th grade. And Pewaukee School, you know how this is, all the children and their parents come pouring out for this visitation. And my colleague, the other pastor, saw this gaggle of, 14-year-old boys just walking in, not knowing what to do. And this was so moving to me. My partner just kind of corralled these boys and said, come on, we're going to go up and we're going to look at the body. And he accompanied them. And like you're saying, there's no experience. And it isn't even 14-year-olds. It's going to be our own children and ourselves. Very limited exposure to death, because grandma's not dying in our house anymore. Grandma lives across the country. So we're struggling with some of this. Okay. Jan, here you go. The Christian funeral was based on the conviction that the deceased was a saint, a child of God, a sister, brother of Christ, worthy to be honored and embraced with tender affection. It was the last phase of a lifelong journey toward God, a completion of their baptism, and the faithful carried the deceased along the way to the place of final departure with singing and a mixture of grief and joyful hope. Go to funerals if you can. Just go to them and be the body of Christ that's going to share in that, accompanying someone to their, that's the work of the church, right? Yeah, Ann.
I know of a church and there's a group of choir members who go to every funeral that's hosted at their congregation, whether they know that person or not, to sing the hymns loudly. Because sometimes when you're sad, you can't sing. And sometimes if your relatives aren't church-going people, they don't know the tune. And it's kind of sad to be at a funeral when people aren't singing. And so their ministry as members of the choir is to go to every funeral and sing loud.
Yeah.
And there are other congregations who make it their ministry to work with the city where they are to make sure that unclaimed bodies have funerals. So if a homeless person dies and no one claims them, they pay for the burial to make it, because they recognize in that person a fellow child of God,
Yeah.
right? So they make it a beautiful service for them.
This is going back to where we were just talking about the memorial service. Darla, it sounded like how your husband was honored in his death was meaningful. meaningful. So I just like these two images, and there's the instruments, you know, that looked like even just the funeral director just reverently carrying the urn, you know, in a kind of processional. Here's the picture of, this is what the pall for a urn, and maybe it's an appropriate piece of furniture. The last one I did, Schmidt and Bartel brought their own table and tablecloth, so maybe St. Matt's wants to think about some piece of furniture and a pall. And this one I'd never seen. There's actually these products now. It's called an urn carrier, and 2 or 4 people could carry that, and that could belong to the church, and that you are now using that as processional. And I personally really liked what that was, but that again is not maybe a decision you make, but we make, or a church makes. Yeah.
Is the urn stabilized on that?
Yeah, I know. You can't see, but there's a little little brackets holding it steady. I know.
A lot of masking tape.
That would be very dramatic.
Last month, we went to a funeral in Madison, and the person was cremated, and there was a greeting with the urn there and photographs in the narthex that we could view. And then we went in for the service in the church. This was a Lutheran church. And at the end of the service, the family got up and took the urn over to a corner of the church. They had built a columbarium, which is a place to put the ashes. The ashes are then in a rather small container, and there is room for quite a few of those. I was thinking that I wish that St. Matthew's had something like that. I don't know if there's enough sentiment to ever do anything like that, but maybe in a future alteration, something like that could be done. I don't know if there's, if people here would be interested in that to bring forward to a committee for some future alteration, but I'd be curious to know if someone would want to be, have their ashes placed in the church. I mean, something I would go for if we had it. I don't know if you can.
Thank you for that, Jim, and I told him as an architect he can design that for you too. But St. John's in Brookfield had just finished an outdoor crypt area, and it was kind of a little park, but it's right next to the building.
Columbarium.
Columbarium, thank you. The language is, and they actually do their Easter sunrise services start there. I mean, just in that sense. And anybody grow up in the rural congregation when the cemetery was right next door? I mean, it's like we're coming full circle and recognizing the communion of saints is the living and the dead. Okay, one more comment.
Well, you could have a deadline and keep it there until All Saints Day, and then the families could take them away, maybe for a year. I mean, it's a good celebration along with All Saints Day. Just
yeah, it sounds like kind of wide open what the church does. So an order of service is very basic. You can scroll through our ELW anytime. There'll be gathering, thanksgiving for baptism, procession with hymn, prayer and word, a sermon, a eulogy. Tributes are appropriate, as Tom Long calls them, an offering of the people, of just your remembrances. We confess our faith, we pray. Holy Communion is, a consideration. You can see how that is meaningful, but when it's a gathering of strangers, it can also be divisive, possibly, or just exclusive, and ascending with him. Hymns. So I gave you my list of funeral verses, and I just think as a discipline to read through them, it can just be meaningful. I think it's lovely for you to pick out funerals. I know as a preacher, I really lean on, what is the family hearing in the scripture that's speaking to them at this time in their life. So you've got that to kind of work through. And hymns, so the last page of that is, on the right column, you'll see, the left column is our 24 funeral hymns recommended in the ELW. There's lots others. And the right column might be more the things I'm familiar with. Anne made the comment, I think she's spot on, that I'm going to just keep going. One of our struggles is we're in a culture that doesn't know our song. And it's often our own children that will come and be struggling. And so these things have come up over the years. Anybody remember, I'll just play this clip for you because I see if I can. Oh, Brian, how do I play that clip?
Do you have it in a slide?
I thought I did.
Oh, yeah.
Try control, click.
It's a left mouse. What is that to describe it?
I got your song picked out. Wow, great. That was my mother.
All right. This is a scene from an old movie called The Big Chill. It's a reunion of you'll have to just watch it at home. A reunion of college classmates after one of their peers passed away, and it's a very official funeral until the end. The friend gets up and plays "You Can't Always Get What You Want." Yeah, and of course it puts a smile on people's face. So I'm not opposed to that it connected, but I just struggle with this in terms of what are people saying at the funeral? Somewhere over the rainbow. I don't know. What do you have an opinion on that? How do you feel about
I
that?
was to a funeral where they played Lion Sleeps Tonight. I didn't understand it.
Don't we all have varied memories of a lost love or a funeral of, that we've heard songs, and when we hear these old songs played, it brings a smile or,
Yeah, that's what happened at my cousin's funeral.
There was one funeral I went to at the end when everybody was leaving the service. In the background, ever so slightly, they played Stairway to Heaven. And that was, it's so memorable.
And that was, you appreciated that,
Yeah.
I take it, yeah.
Yeah.
Stairway to Heaven?
Can't remember that.
I'm just kind of I'm just curious. And for me, it's the communities aren't necessarily connecting to our songs. They're connecting to these other songs that are giving them a message about death and life.
I know at my cousin's funeral, we had some of the usual normal hymns, but then we also had the version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow that Izzy, the Hawaiian singer, sang.
Yeah.
Because during my cousin's battle with cancer, that was the one thing that always lifted her spirits, and he decided to play that at the funeral.
And I'm like, amen, just that there was something connecting there, yeah.
In a very traditional Episcopal church in Austin, Texas, a serviceman died, and they insisted that his granddaughters play on, I think it was a flute and a violin, Anchors Away.
Anchors Away.
He was a Navy man.
And he's a Navy man, so you're like, there you go. And it's so memorable, and it just kind of puts a smile on her face to remember them. Which I think is good. The grieving need to both have the joy and the laughter as well as the sorrow. Yeah.
My brother was a real jazz lover, and we did play his Bohé list as a prelude to the funeral of jazz greats.
Right.
But then in the funeral itself, we sang the good old Lutheran hymns.
Right. Now, in this category, I will say, as you make plans, you may love these songs, but you're gonna have to find out what your church allows, what the church musician is able to do, capable of doing. You know, I've battled over recordings, you know, can we play recordings or does it have to be live? What are the skill sets of your musicians? You know, and it's really hard to put your church and your family pitting each other in this time of decision making. So just my best advice, kind of find out the lay of the land. And sometimes your beloved songs, you know, they can play at the reception or at a more private gathering, or, you know, sometimes during the slideshow that can be a little more different setting. Just some ideas.
So
Nancy?
is there a St. Matthew's policy about that, and how would we get that?
You know, I looked for that you have a wedding guidelines, but you don't have I haven't seen a funeral guidelines. And I think that needs to be made, it exists to be made more public. Yeah.
You know, because that's a time that's very emotional, and you don't wanna, you know, you've got in your mind what you want, and then your church, who's giving you, you know, support and everything, says, well, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not what you wanna hear.
Right, so best to
You
get
know,
some clarity way ahead of time. Yep, good, I think you're right on, Nancy.
Yeah, I had to step out for a second, so I don't know if anyone mentioned, but when Pastor Gary's wife Sue passed away, they played a recording of her. She was a wonderful singer in the choir, and they played a recording of her singing at the funeral, and that touched an awful lot of people.
Wow.
It really touched a lot of people.
I can imagine.
Hearing that.
Yeah.
that's true. I don't think
You know, there's a whole new generation of nuns that go to a lot of funerals, but they don't go to church. And the funeral home is pretty well co-opted. They used to have a list of clergy to call to bring in. And so now they're encouraged, whoever, just like weddings in Cancun, your best friend officiates. And so I've talked to some young people who just, we don't want a church funeral. You know, and yet they've grown up in the church, but they go to these celebration of life where their best friends officiate and they tell a lot of stories and play a lot of music.
Right.
So that secularization is a reality for a lot of young people.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I bring it, because it could be your own children. It's gonna be my children, at least one of them, that grew up in the church, but, you know, and that's why I do think, as a whole, children will honor your wishes.
Write them down.
If they
And so
know
that's why
what
you
your
gotta
wishes
put it down.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, in line with that, a pastor in Austin had one of these seminars, and he said, make sure that your children are meet with the pastor and are in charge, because they're usually so grief-stricken, and the in-laws come in, and the whole picture changes. And it's, I don't know that, but he said,
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Be very clear
They
who's
control.
responsible for the decision making.
yeah, they control,
Yeah.
control because of
Because,
the
you
children.
know, if our families don't get along on a good day, they're not gonna get along very well on a stressful day.
I just wanted to encourage all of you to talk with whoever you want to be making these decisions, and to have that conversation, as awkward as it may be. Because if your kids aren't church-going kids, then you won't get hymns of the church, right? Or you will, but they'll be kind of the standard ones that don't feel personal, right? And you'll give your family the gift of avoiding really difficult things. Like, my mother-in-law is the one who has made every detail of her funeral, right? The time and the date and who, you know, and all of that. And she told her sons that she was going to donate her body to science, but the policy of this hospital was that then the cremains were kind of put together and in one spot on the hospital grounds. And her son said, well, then I won't know where you are. And she was like, oh, like she didn't know that that would be important to him, right? Like he wanted there to be a headstone with her name on it that he could go visit. And that wasn't important to her,
Yeah.
right? She's like, I'm not gonna be there, I don't care, but he really did. And so they had that conversation and she changed her will
Oh, that's
for
awesome.
him.
That's
And
good.
on the other hand, my grandfather was not a church-going person at all, and he said, I don't want an obituary, I don't want a service, I don't want a luncheon, I don't want anything. And we kind of said, you're going to be gone, we're going to do whatever we want.
There's always that too, isn't there? So I got a few minutes. So a good funeral is this. You've got the saint, you've got a place, you've got the people, you've got the word. You want to hear the gospel story. A place to bring griefs, memories, regrets, guilt, and anger, and offer it all to God. And funerals can be transformative. It is a worship experience. It's a communal gathering. That's where the church is gathered. It can be therapeutic. We are giving thanks to God. We are remembering. We could be caring for the world, the sorrows and the needs of others. And it can be educational. The nature of our hope, the destination of the dead, and the power of the resurrection. A lot can be happening. Don't forget the funeral meal. I think this is an important part of the whole thing, that this is the grieving must continue to live, especially when it's such a heart-wrenching, well, they all are heart-wrenching. Grief will, even when you go, my mom's 98, she passed away, but you go, now I'm alone, I'm the orphan. There's all these weird emotions that will come to all of us. But that celebration goes on, and the gathering of the people. We cannot undervalue. This is our whole theme of hospitality. If you haven't picked up on Lent, that the best gift we give to each other is when we gather together and care for each other, and just laugh and support and dream and talk, and that is our strength, the community gathered. Okay, 10 things. I gave you your to-do list. You're going to figure out your funeral home. You're going to make a decision around burial or cremation. Oh, we didn't really talk about this. Is there going to be a final resting place for you and a marker? Sometimes you can even prearrange that. Or are you going to be scattered? Your church, or a funeral home service, decide that. As you know, many times they'll choose a memorial. I had one widower say, I don't want my church to be associated with such a sad event. And I was like, okay. That was interesting. Your Bible verses, your music, obviously the people you're thinking of, you could start to make some general ideas of that. A florist, that's not even, these are kind of lower things. Memorial gifts. Sometimes those get made really last minute. And I think for you to make some more intentional, that there's a tradition that at your death that people can make financial gifts in your memory, and how they need to do that, and where would you like that to be? I find this interesting. The family picks out, St. Matthew's puts the deceased photo on the front of the bulletin, and it goes in the obituary. And I see photos picked from when a person is in their 30s to died last year. I just find that, or it'll be like, we didn't really have a good photo of them. Isn't that, right? Carl, I want to get a photo of you because this is going to go on your obituary. And as Ann said, communicate your plans with your loved ones. 10 things.
She's going to put me in an hourglass after I'm dead to make me work.
There we go.
So, speaking of those photos, how do we keep that? How does St. Matthew's keep them?
Yes, so any of your plans, you're welcome to just submit, give them to Bonnie, and we keep a paper and file, just of anything that you want to communicate with us.
It's in an electronic file, these photos for like.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, or they'll print them out or something. My preference is you keep them where you keep all your important documents for your loved one first. Second, you can leave some things with the funeral home, and third, would be St. Matthew's. But eventually, the other two parties will bring it to the church, what they have, would be my sense. Let's read together. When our winter approaches, it is not cruelty that we are returned to the soil. It is simply the right time. It is simply the right time. And our stories, our songs, our lives will nourish the next generation in the great cycle of life that turns about us. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the conversation. Thank you.